The following paid commercial program is brought to you by TD Wealth.
Welcome to Money Talk. I'm Kim Parley. Thanks so much for joining us. From geopolitical conflicts to market volatility, there's certainly been no shortage of news and events for investors to consider recently. But when it comes to what to expect in 2024, my next guest says prepare to be surprised. Kevin Hebner is Global Investment Strategist at TD Epoch, and he joins me now. Kevin, always a pleasure to have you with us. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that we're going to be surprised in 2024, but let's just maybe go through the list of things that you're watching and that we should be thinking about in terms of being surprised. And the first one is the Taiwan election. Tell me why this matters, first off, and why you're watching it.
Okay. I guess in terms of background, we're fundamental investors. We're obsessed with free cash flow, return on invested capital, their sustainability. But even from that perspective, it's important to be thinking about risk on the horizon, different policy changes that could happen. And as Ian Bremmer said yesterday in his 2024 outlook, the geopolitical risks are higher now than they've ever been during his lifetime. So fundamental investors need to be thinking about these. 2024 is going to be busy, lots of surprises, we think. And the first one on the calendar is the Taiwan election in 5 weeks. There's 3 parties that are running. The current government party is leading a little bit in the polls, and they have a bit of a leaning away from China. The number 2 party, the KMT, wants to move a little bit towards China. And these can be important. But the real risk with the Taiwan election is that there is a mistake that gets made, that someone makes a statement that China interprets as moving towards independence, and China gets upset with that. And so it's an important election to watch, not for the bread and butter issues that they're running for, but how the policy towards China changes and the possibility of a mistake occurring.
And if there's a mistake that occurs, and again, I know you're not going to prognosticate and try and predict the future, but if China perceives that there's a move towards independence, I would just that would be an escalation in that relationship and what that could mean.
Yeah, that is a big red line for China, and I think bad things could happen in that situation, and that would certainly be terrible for Taiwan. It'd be terrible for global markets and the global economy as well.
Yeah.
The other factor that's going to affect Taiwan later the year is if President Trump ends up winning the election, he's promised a major arms deal, major arms shipment towards Taiwan. And that is also something that China isn't going to like very much. So there's a couple events during 2024 in which we have to watch the relationship between Taiwan and China and how that develops.
Well, you mentioned the U.S. election. I mean, obviously, it will impact what's happening with China and Taiwan, given who's president. But what else will you be watching in the election?
So currently, and the election is exactly 11 months from now, and a lot can happen over 11 months. And certainly that's been the case with previous elections. But if it was held today, according to betting sites, Trump would win 54% versus 46% against Biden. So at least right now, Trump is in the lead. And he's been very detailed this time. If you look at his website, donaldjtrump.com, in terms of the proposals on his platform, one is a call for tariffs, 10% tariffs across the board, universal. And that's something he can do without Congress. A second would be tax cuts, similar to the tax cuts he enacted in 2017. A third would be a big change in policy towards energy. So he's against subsidies and regulations favoring green energy. He, on the other hand, wants to favor oil, natural gas, wants to get out of the Paris Climate Accord, these sorts of things. In terms of the policy with China, he certainly is a hawk. Policy would be erratic. And things like Taiwan, he would certainly favor close relationship with Taiwan and a major arms deal. And there's a number of other policies that he would, at least if he gets elected, that he said that he would like to enact.
What about the Fed? Because, of course, he would get a chance to weigh in on who replaces Jay Powell, I think, in May 2026?
Yes. So it's still a long way away. But Trump has been very clear that he would not reappoint Powell, and that he would like someone who's loyal to him, And Trump certainly has a strong preference for low interest rates. So he'd try to get someone who's going to be quite dovish in pushing interest rates low. But overall, when you think of Trump, there may be a visceral reaction to Trump and the way he says some things. But if you look at the combination of deregulation, tax cuts, fiscal expansion because there's very aggressive industrial policies associated with a Trump administration, it's not clear that's bad for the S&P. In fact, there's some sectors which are hurt, but overall probably good for the S&P, challenging for the dollar, probably also challenging for bond markets, but for equity investors, important, lots of sector rotation, but overall positive in the same way that markets reacted positively to the Trump election initially in 2017.
I still get nervous when you said those 10% tariffs on all imports being a Canadian, Kevin, but we'll come back to that. Listen, I know that the global conflicts on your radar, Israel, Hamas, we still have Russia and Ukraine, potentially something happening in China. I'm just going to move past that a little bit to say that's something in the mix, but maybe you could just talk a bit about how globalization is changing. I mean, we know there's the path to deglobalization. You're the one who told me about it. So how do you see that moving in the next year or so?
Yeah, so it's a big theme that we've been looking at for the last 8 years. You had the period from 1990 with the dissolution of the USSR until around 2015, hyperglobalization, American hegemony, America ruled the roost, and trade was in hyperdrive. Since then, we've really been playing the movie backwards, and we've seen this in terms of trade flows, FDI, portfolio flows. So we're de-risking the global economy. There still will be a lot of trade, but changing the nature of trade. For example, China, part of their growth strategy is to increase exports, but those exports won't be to the developed world. They'll be to what's called the global south, other emerging market countries. So I think the de-risking of the global economy is important. There's lots of areas where supply chains are fragile, where they're risky, and they need to be strengthened. And industrial policy in the United States and other countries has been very aggressive after having been non-existent for a long time. And whether we had a Biden administration or a Trump administration after the next election, we're going to see a lot of areas where industrial policy gets moved into, I think, turbocharged territory.
A lot of complexity. All right, stay with us when we come back. Kevin's going to tell us what this means for markets and the economy, how this is all going to play out. You're watching Money Talk. We'll be right back.